Good evening, everybody. You're very welcome to the second talk in our Brick series, where we're talking about the church and how the church positions itself in an ever-changing society to deliver its mission. And last week we were educated, entertained, and challenged, I think, by John's talk on church and state. And tonight we are absolutely thrilled to welcome back Karin to St. Mark's. For those of you who haven't been around for over 20 years, Karin was our youth worker up until, she says 21 years ago, but that means she must have started when she was about 12. So, I'm not having that at all. But since then, among the many great things that Karin has done is work as the diocesan advisor on fresh expressions, and that's what she's going to talk to us about tonight. I'm not going to steal any of her thunder, and I'm not going to delay things any longer. So, Karin, can I just pray for you before we start? Father, thank you for Karin and for the tremendous blessing that she was to our community during her time as youth worker. And thank you that you have continued to work with her and through her and to inspire her for your mission in the church ever since. And thank you for the words that you've given her to share with us tonight. And we ask that you bless her and continue to inspire her as she speaks to us. In Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Well, thank you for having me. It's really good to be back, looking at these red seats again, because I joined St. Mark's in the period when the building was being done up. So when I joined, we were at St. Aidan's School. Those of you, faces I recognise from long ago. And then I remember all the discussions about these pew things and how intense they were. So it's just great to be back, having shared a significant period of growth, actually, in the life of St. Mark's, and just to hear lots of lovely stories since. You have a special place in my heart, so it's just great to be here. Now then. Now that's interesting because we did have the thing up there, so we're having a technical something going on. Didn't we? We did have the things, we did, didn't we, honest? You walk away from it and it's bad. So what I'm going to talk about is what are fresh expressions of church, because not everybody knows, or actually my experience is that a lot of people have got a vague idea but then have maybe got the wrong end of the stick slightly. So we'll do a bit of what are fresh expressions of church and think about what opportunities they bring to parish churches. So we'll do some myth busting and hopefully get a bit of vision going as well. And if I start a bit with my own story of how I got into fresh expressions of church, whilst Neil rubs his chin. So a bit of my story, really. Obviously, I've been youth worker at St. Mark's, but my story in ministry and evangelism goes back a long, long time. I first of all, got into evangelism and had a calling to evangelism right when I was back at university, and I chose to train as a teacher because of that call. And I took a very quick calculation. What on earth can I do for God with a drama degree? I'm fit for nothing. I thought, in usefulness terms, I could do teaching or nursing. And I thought, teaching's quick. So that is the kind of spiritual person I am. I had this very distinct call from God, and teaching was quick, and I ended up training as a drama teacher, and then I ended up having thought that God couldn't possibly use drama because it's so flighty. I joined a Christian theatre company, and actually evangelism, mission and theatre were welded together for me. So I was in Salt Mine Theatre Company for nearly 5 years, and then I went on to Cliff College, which is a Methodist Bible college, although I wasn't a Methodist, and I was actually called an evangelist there, training people in evangelism, leading missions all around the country. And it was after Cliff that we moved to Harrogate, because I met my husband at Cliff, and I led a charity here called Youth for Christ. Schools work, my teaching background, lots of drama and creativity, youth work, fabulous, and we attended here in that period as normal people in the pew, because I was employed by Youth for Christ. Then my husband's job took us on to the south coast. We drew a circle round Dorchester where he was working, and I got a job with a 1662 everything church. If they could have had 1662 wallpaper, they'd have put it up. Everything was 1662, and I was the family worker. They thought that just employing me would mean that all the families would come into church for their 1662 services. They really thought that. The most wonderful, prayerful people who had given sacrificially for this role, it was the most unlikely thing. But my way in mission then opened the door to fresh expressions for me, because it was clear that that wasn't going to happen. So I became the lollipop lady for the school, and within 2 weeks I knew everybody. I knew who'd got cancer. I knew whose relationship was in trouble. I knew everything. 2 weeks. And to this day, being the lollipop lady has been the most significant piece of work I've ever done. Everything's been slightly downhill since then, I have to say, because it was so precious. And you were meeting people beyond the church who would never come to church. I was serving the needs they really wanted. They'd been desperate for a lollipop lady on their busy corner where the cars came flying past. And off the back of that, I set up a fresh expression of church through the relationships I made there. And I set up, as a pioneer, the very first, and possibly only, I don't know, rota of lollipop ladies. And so I got more and more people in the church to join the rota, so we could have more and more rather than me just being at the roadside every day. So that opened the door to fresh expressions of church for me. And if I look at this picture, I'm telling you some of the things on this picture that have been stages in my own progression in mission. My big heroes, Jackie Pullinger and Gladys Aylward, people who went out. The lollipop lady going out, not just asking people to come in. Youth for Christ very much going out. And then I've ended up with God's calling again, eventually getting nearer to the centre of the church. So I was youth worker here at St Mark's, which was a great privilege. A lot of the young people who were coming through the doors then were some partly embedded church families, some partly on the St Aidan's quest. So that is a way that God would bring outside in, actually, and give us connections with outside. And at St Peter's, I've got the similar thing going on. I'm curate at St Peter's now, following my time as a Fresh Expressions advisor. But all the way through, for me, the calling of outside is the common thread. Even though God is narrowing me down in a sense, and here I am as a vicar now, trainee vicar. Obviously, a lot more of my life is going to be in church, but my calling in terms of my vision is, what about beyond? And that's part of the call to fresh expressions. What about, as you look round your church, what kind of people are not here? What areas of our community don't come? And if those are the kinds of questions you ask yourself on a Sunday, then maybe you're a kindred spirit. All on the vision of growth, all of us, whatever we are, but I think it is a particular calling that God does give some people to have that real care and concern for outside. So, from what you have heard of Fresh Expressions so far, which might be nothing, and don't apologise for it if you've never heard anything about it, you're just here out of curiosity, or you've got a question about Fresh Expressions, or something that comes to mind, just buzz with your next door neighbour about Fresh Expressions on these lines of these 3 questions that are up. Go. Have a chat. Thank you. Right, I'll stop you talking now, even though I'm sure you've only just got going, but that's fine. But it'll be nice to hear some of the first things you spoke about. Neil's going to scribe them for me, mainly for my benefit, so if there's anything that I need to return to, we've got it written down. So, first of all, has anyone got any examples of fresh expressions that come to mind when you first hear that phrase, things you've heard of? And don't worry if there's nothing, because that's fine. Halifax Church that started as a food bank, yes. Linda Maslin, who you've had here speaking, was in charge of that. It's now no longer. She has moved on and is now doing something almost similar but on a bigger scale in the centre of Bradford, and that is now no more. Took the leader out and it's had an effect, but it was absolutely brilliant. Yes, a food bank started in Halifax. People came for food and were offered prayer, and they had the most amazing answers to prayer, incredible answers to prayer, and a church evolved out of that. Not strictly speaking an Anglican church, because it was a mixture of churches together, and that's another creative thing that Fresh Expressions can often do. So it was Anglican in the sense that Linda, the leader, was Anglican, and bishops took an interest. But again, that made it perhaps a bit difficult when she was moved out. Who owned it? But for the years it ran, it was astonishing. Any other ideas? And what are they doing?
They do, I think, sort of catering, that kind of thing. And they've got a pantry now, which is working very well. They're expanding. How it is used, I don't know the details. My daughter is very much involved in that.
Thank you. So another food-based ministry, out of which has grown some worship. Brilliant. Anything else? Lego Church. I keep hearing a lot about Lego Church. So you've got that in your heads. I'm longing to come and see it. It sounds amazing. That would potentially be another fresh expression of church. I can't say from the title, actually, but it could potentially be one. Yes?
I don't know much about it, but I've heard about something called Bread Church, where people bake together.
Bread Church was an amazing fresh expression set up in Liverpool to start with, but there have been others that have followed that pattern. And that was absolutely fits the definition of fresh expression of church. People came largely from the streets, got engaged in bread making. Whilst the bread was rising, they shared stories and scriptures and prayers. And so you have this combination of need plus the feeding of the soul. So Bread Church is a really good example, if you've heard of that. Any others knocking around in your minds? Street Angels, that's a really interesting mission enterprise, and as we go on, you might see the connections between something like that and Fresh Expressions. Men's Sheds, again, that's another interesting mission thing that could evolve into a Fresh Expression. Do you see how my language is changing around it? It's a bit murky. Is something a Fresh Expression or isn't it? And so it's really good to have this kind of conversation. Any questions in your heads about Fresh Expressions? Were there any people talking about that? And don't worry if not. Well, I'm a bit worried about them because of this or that kind of question. No, everyone's happy? Didn't get that far. That's fine. That's fine. Those first responses are really helpful because they're showing that understanding what a fresh expression is actually quite difficult because they kind of evolve. They evolve. This is the official definition, a bit of a mouthful. A fresh expression of church is a form of church for our changing culture, established primarily for the benefit who are not yet members of any church. They come into being through principles of listening, service, incarnational mission, and making disciples. So, off the back of that definition, you can see why the Lollipop Church was a fresh expression. The Lollipop lady went to people who didn't come to church, got to know them, and made a church with those people. I don't know whether Lego Church is or isn't. There's not a good or a bad in this, because it's all good mission. But the big impetus is, are you working with people who wouldn't have come to church anyway? You know, that's the issue. Are you going out beyond to make church out there? You could use this building, but are you bringing in the people who would just in a month of Sundays never come? Or you might use another building entirely, a pub or wherever, because they're just not going to come. And that's different from, we're going to do the worship slightly differently because it feels more meaningful, isn't it? Because these people are already here. Do you see what I mean? It doesn't mean it's bad, it's just a different thing. So, a mums and toddlers group, this is the kind of question we're into straight away. Is that a fresh expression of church? It depends on the mums and toddlers group. If these mums and toddlers would never normally cross the threshold, but they come to that, and then are not just looked after, but start to be discipled in a proper, regular way where you can definitely call it worship and discipleship, not just a little prayer at the end, you're into fresh expressions territory. Mums and toddlers groups are fantastic mission. They may not all be fresh expressions of church. Are you seeing the difference? An annual lambing service. I'm writing these examples down because when I was Fresh Expressions advisor, I did a huge counting across the diocese and people filled in forms telling me all about their fresh expressions. These were all on the list of what the church thought was a fresh expression. Something that happens once a year, can that disciple people? Is that a church or is that a one-off event? You'll have different answers to that actually as to whether you've got an urban mentality or a rural mentality, because in the rural cycle of things actually, they might think an annual thing is okay. Because the cycle is different and you've got to travel long distances and it's all done very differently. But actually, making disciples on a once-a-year event, helping people grow as Christians, pretty tough. Pretty tough. The craft group that just uses the hall, when I dug into that one, there was no spiritual content whatsoever. They rented their hall out to a craft group and it was good for people's mental health. Is that a fresh expression of church? No, it's just a really lovely thing to do. Don't not do it. Because I've said it's not a fresh expression of church, but it's not a fresh expression of church. A new service with new wine songs, because people are fed up with the old ones. We've just dealt with that. Those people are already coming. It's not a fresh expression of church. Termly hymns and pims and beer and hymns, those kind of events, they could really grow into fresh expressions of church if you make good contacts with people. It might be a good way in, but on their own. Do you see what I mean? It's a bit of a porous boundary. And so you hear the term fresh expression bandied around all over the place, and yet a lot of those places where they're bandied around miss the mark, and then, of course, you get misunderstandings about what they are. You get the joke of, well, if I just mention Jesus once, it's a fresh expression of church. Yeah. So it's a tighter definition than that. So this is what Rowan Williams says. Rowan Williams is a big champion of fresh expressions of church, and he's very wise, so I've got to quote him. There are at least 2 churches of England, he says. There is the growing edge, the abundance of new things happening with the challenges about worship and ministry that they bring. And then there is the so-called routine, the ordinary life of the parish where people are unobtrusively introduced to Jesus Christ daily. And these two are really one. So different forms of church working together. A lot of people who have problems with fresh expressions of church like to pit parish church against fresh expressions as if they're enemies. You know, we're this or we're that. And Rowan and I are on the same page. It's all one, folks, because especially as Anglicans, we're very much called to this parish ministry. The parish is not the building. The parish is the geographical area that God's given us to serve. So we may need both to really effectively reach our parish, if that makes sense. Unless every single person in your parish is coming into the building. And you can imagine that happening. So one way of imagining them is big established oak trees, or I'm not sure if that's an oak, it's a big established tree anyway, and forests full of temporary flowers. That's one way of understanding fresh expressions. Some fresh expressions have a real shelf life. We've just heard about Halifax. There is a fragility to them. They're highly contextual because they're to meet the particular needs of a certain group of people. Some last a very long time. Some morph into parish churches. There are some churches in our diocese that have started as a fresh expression. They've then become a resource church that have completely revitalised what was a parish church that was failing. That story has happened for some fresh expressions. Some come and go. And so you've got this pattern of the established big trees, if you like, with a big infrastructure like this, with something more fragile that serves a purpose maybe for a shorter amount of time. And in my understanding of it, the woods are all the better for having both. So we don't have to necessarily choose one over the other. The two can work together really well. So this is where you need your pieces of paper, folks. That is an outline of your parish. So you've got a bit of a cheat there as to what your parish is shaped like. The blue dot along the A61 about halfway down, that's M&S Food Hall. Please draw your parish, and then I'll feed into you some things that you might want to write on your drawing. Off you go. Because this exercise is about how well do you know your parish, what's going on in your parish, to help you notice where are the areas where this church is connecting, and are there areas where you're not. Subtitle, could it be ripe for a fresh expression? So if you get your overall shape in first, and then I will put up on the slide some things you might want to think about to put in your parish shape. And you might want to chat to your neighbour as well about, I wonder where that boundary actually is. Because you've got the shape, but it may not be that clear looking at the shape. What is our parish? Do you know where the edge is and where actually people become Christ Church's responsibility or panel's responsibility? Sorry? Oh, yes. Okay. I wouldn't worry about extreme accuracy. This understanding of what our parish is, it actually goes right to the heart of the vision of the Church of England. We are a geographical church with a geographical vision, and the clue is in the title. So understanding what your parish is quite fundamental for everyone in a church, because that's what you're praying for week by week. You're praying for every person in your parish. So it's really helpful to know what your parish is. So, I'm not going to keep that up for much longer because the other stuff's more important. So don't worry if you've not got an accurate shape. So there's one way of mapping the parish that you might want to think about. Well, I'm going to show you two. One is about types of people. Can you identify in your parish, you might not be able to put it down geographically, it might be words all over the place, types of people who live in your parish that you can identify. There's some examples. But you might want to choose to look at it this way, more geographical. What facilities are there? Where do people congregate? What areas of the parish can you identify? Oh, yeah, I know lots of people come to St Mark's from the Oatlands area, but do many come from X area? Do you see what I mean? So you can go either way. Types of people, or things more to do with facilities and connection. Schools might be in there as well. You don't have to be prescriptive to that. And no one's marking this, so you write down what feels useful to you. We're going to have a very quick go at this, so this might be homework. I'm acknowledging that. This might be, if this grabs your imagination, this kind of exercise, it might be something you go home with, add to it, and pray over it, because you're not going to cover it all now. This might be a getting you going exercise. If you're covering everybody, then that might be a sign that God really isn't calling this parish church. Do you know what I mean? To look into fresh expressions? There's not a right and a wrong. But clearly the 1662 church that employed me realised they had no children and families. So God is doing different things in different places. In my early times at St Mark's, there was a lot of conversation about whether to do a church plant on the St George's estate, which was just being built. For this reason, there were going to be new people moving in. There was a facility there to meet. There was a lot of energy put into thinking and praying about that. But at that time, this building was newly done, and there was actually so much interest in people coming into the building that that's when a 5 o'clock service was started in here. But that was the kind of thing that St Mark's at that point was praying about, because it noticed a new area where obviously people didn't come. And actually the answer was to do it here. I'll give you about another minute on this, which won't be enough, but like I say, if God captivates you with this, this will be homework. And if he doesn't, don't worry about it. Now you've got to probably the end of that minute, so just chat to your neighbour about whether anything is emerging at all for you that gets you into the territory of thinking about either geographical areas where you don't think people connect, or types of people that are in the parish that you're not connecting with yet. And again, the answer may be we're connecting with everybody. Just see if you can notice anything from that, where you've got to so far. It may be that that kind of exercise and that conversation raises more questions for you than gives you answers. If you're the kind of person that's being called to pray for a fresh expression to develop, then you will want to find out more. Those questions will live with you. And if they don't live with you, God's not badgering you about it. So I'll stop you there with that. And again, if it's bugging you, take it home, work a bit more on it. This is the stuff that really connects with me when I do these parish maps in different churches. I try and notice where are the wilderness areas, or who are the wilderness people. And then I compare these two verses that we're told are the same. But there's an interesting punctuation difference that makes a difference. In the wilderness, prepare the way for the Lord. Make straight in the desert a highway for our God. And the Isaiah version with its punctuation is the one that sets me alight with the calling God has given me. Go to the place that looks like the wilderness and start talking about God there. Go to the place that looks like the wilderness and start engaging with people there. That's different from the ministry of just asking people to come to us. And asking people to come to us is a really significant ministry. You know, really significant. But they're just two sides of the same coin. And some of us, I do believe, have this calling to go into the wilderness, to do some preparation for those who will follow. One Fresh Expressions practitioner from the Methodist tradition calls Fresh Expressions prophetic communities, which is a really lovely phrase. Go and start something before you even really know what it is, and pray that God, by his Spirit, will help you develop that. Hopefully without quite the same outcome as John the Baptist had with it. I've kept my head so far with this work. And again, we're back to that image. Big, strong, established trees and sometimes more temporary flowers making up an ecosystem together. Again, when people pit fresh expressions and new forms of worship against your more established things, that's a real problem. Because the ideal is to have both. Often it's the big, established things with long roots that have been there a long time that can really help a fresh expression get going. Milford-on-Sea, where I went with everything 1662, and people who, bless them, didn't have an idea really of how to do it, but knew from God they wanted a family worker. The prayer and the finance they put into getting that thing going was sacrificial and showed great vision. And a couple of years down the line, the Fresh Expression was bigger numerically than the main church. Eventually, it moved into the main church, along with its own youth worker and its own children's worker. But that was a very long time coming. It wasn't a takeover bid, it was just an evolution of the two working together. And they've kept the old traditions as well. They've managed to have both. So the two can work together in harmony, not on opposite sides. It takes a different methodology to coming in evangelism and discipleship. If you go on a LISIG course, anyone been on LISIG? From the Diocesan Church Growth course is Leading Your Church into Growth course. A lot of the conversation there is traditional parish church coming in, how to get the low-hanging fruit Who's on the verge of coming in? Or who do we have contact with already that we can really help? Great. It's a particular methodology, but it's different from the Fresh Expressions methodology where you're going to the wilderness making friends for the first time. They're not opposing one another. It's all church growth. It's all evangelism. It's all discipleship, but just different methodologies. So we can do Leipzig in a church and we can go on the Fresh Expressions course. That's fine. In fact, that's really wholesome and good. We can do both. I'm only putting this up there because it's impossible to read, but just to remind me to tell you that if you're interested in all the interplay with the different church planting initiatives that you might hear of, resource church, church plants, Fresh Expressions, new things, new worshipping communities, and you want to know a bit more about how they work together, I've got that piece of paper on a sheet for you to pick up. It won't interest everybody, but if it does you, it's there. That's just to remind me to tell you. The upshot of it is that when you hear all these titles, the methodologies are different. They work together for the same aims, but everybody's borrowing tips from everybody else. If you go to the new church planting conferences, KX Connect, run by Rick Thorpe, that's got the big money in it, that's church planting, but they're no longer using the language of old-fashioned church planting. They're using lots of Fresh Expressions language all sewn in, because actually everybody's learning from everybody else. So it's an interesting diagram if you're interested in that interplay. And just finally, as I kind of come to an end to my official bit, I want to tell you about Greenhouse. Has anyone heard about Greenhouse? No, it's interesting. It's here in Harrogate. It's specially for Harrogate area set up. It's been going a few years, and has everyone heard of Kairos Church? Right, okay. Kairos Church and some others, and Jude Smith, who is in charge of growth for the diocese, run these groups called the Greenhouse groups. And one of them, the very first one that was set up, is in Harrogate. And if God is calling you to this kind of work, which is often small, you and a few friends within your church, maybe meeting a group of mums and toddlers, you know, and wanting to develop a little worship community for them, for example, you can go to Greenhouse. It's about 3 times a year and share ideas with other people who've got the same calling. In my day, when I worked for the diocese and across the whole country, we did lots of running courses on how to do this stuff. But there's a problem with a course for people in this kind of work, and it's because it changes every week. Your problems and issues that crop up change really, really quickly. So if your problem that you're facing is on month 10 of the course you've joined, you've got to wait a long time to deal with the issue you're on. So now they're bringing communities of people together to share handy hints and tips. So you might hear something amazing from someone who's doing a Fresh Expression 2 years down the line, and they've got just the bit of advice for you on day one. And so there's a lot of mutual sharing, prayer, care. So if you want to know more about Greenhouse, or you know someone at St Mark's who's getting inklings of a Fresh Expression, you don't have to be by yourself in making up the methodology. Contact Ben. He's probably the easiest one. I haven't told him I've given his name out, but he'll forgive me, because he'll be able to get you into the Greenhouse group. It's about 3 times a year, meeting with other practitioners. You can see the next one's at Starling in town, so it's all very informal, and it will help you get going. Talk to Mike first before you get a group to go to Greenhouse, because whatever mission initiatives God is brewing up, one of the tests of whether now is the right time is whether it actually the whole church structure can cope with the energy that you're going to put into that, and whether it will help the whole church. So don't start anything without having a chat with Mike first, would be my advice. So that brings us to the end of my presentation bit that's thrown lots of information at you. So now it's a case of being open for questions. Do you want to, again, chat quickly with the person next to you, see if any questions have emerged, and then I'll take them. Off you go.